Welcome to the Total Warhammer 3 Diplomacy Masterclass. This guide is part of a tightly scripted playlist designed to send you up to Legendary difficulty in no time at all. So please check the playlist and feel free to jump back to the basics or fundamentals if this maybe seems too far ahead. But this guide will be diving into advanced tactics, but will assume no prior knowledge, so all the terms will be defined as they come, and even if you are an advanced player, you might find a few things here that may have either A, changed in Total Warhammer 3, or B, just be new perspectives which can really change your game. Now, diplomacy is a tool for both good and evil, and even the factions that can't even use diplomacy can still use it to read the other factions and races and their interactions and feelings towards each other. Treating a faction badly that one of your enemies really hates is not going to have much consequence, but you might want to be a bit kinder to the friends of your friends. In summary, diplomacy is a way of managing your engagements as well as manipulating your biggest threats to ensure they always feel challenged. Now, let's talk about the right number of wars, and what this means is that you always want your main army active and engaged in some form of combat, but you don't want too many fronts at once. That's going to overexpose you, lead you indefensible, and needing multiple armies just to defend yourself. You want to have barriers that you can close off with either terrain, mountains, the water, but even better, if you have neighbors that you can trade with that won't attack you. The result can be just a single front where you can dedicate without having to spend money on defenses. Just remember, throughout your current invasion, just always be looking ahead. Make sure your future enemies stay divided and that your actions align with the interests of your future friends. This takes me to critical tip number 1, which is don't start what you can't finish. This is about having the right number of wars, which is ideally 1. Now, the world will go to crap eventually, and there will be multiple conflicts that you will be roped into, or people that just hate you by virtue of your race. But what I mean is bordering conflicts, ones that you have to be invested in, and direct military towards them. You want these to be as few as possible, and diplomacy is your means of controlling this. If you manage your diplomacy and statecraft correctly, you will hopefully only have a single enemy, preferably at your borders, so you can expand and attack them, and by the time they're defeated, you've annoyed none of your friends, you've maybe made a few more enemies, and hopefully they're in your way for your next expansion. So in summary, if you are going to start a war, make sure your position, have your military not trespassing but ready to go and jump so you could pull the trigger and look at what they have, make an assessment of their number of forces, where they are, and make sure you can decisively and quickly wrap up the conflict, because having lots of enemies will make you look weak. There is a point where you can't really fight having lots of enemies, but the more you have, the more of a target you are, because other people can get a bit more chummy by declaring war on you. But who do we interact with? Who do we not want to deal with to make sure we stay popular with the right people? Well, let the races guide you. That's critical tip number 2. Follow the intuition of your race. The table on your screen shows the affinity of the different races towards each other. Green being they like each other, the red being they really don't. If you are a good faction, this includes the human faction, dwarves, the elves, except the dark elves, lizardmen. Essentially, if they look good, the chances are you can benefit from being on their side, and you should think twice before attacking them if you are a good faction. Good factions tend to be very trustworthy towards good factions. This is going to create a great empire next to yours, which you can trade with and never have to worry. Likewise, evil factions don't necessarily band together, but here I'll point out that races themselves tend to have an affinity for each other. So unless in the early stages finishing up an initial civil war, you should really be aiming not to attack races of your own type. This is more of a rule for the good factions, but the evil factions tend to have something in common, and that's that all the good factions hate them, tend to try to wipe them out, so you can often make a good makeshift coalition with vampires, Norskins, even chaos. But as a rule of thumb, don't just take territory because it looks nice. Make sure that this fits an overall strategy and you're not alienating yourself. But you can make some wide sweeping rules of thumb. Tend to look after your own kind, let good factions look after good factions, and evil prioritize looking after evil ones, or maybe destroying them last. Many of the concepts we're about to go through may seem very big and daunting, and look, we've got an entire world full of factions to consider, but here's the thing, each faction only needs to consider who they are next to. right? So if a faction has not discovered a faction, then they cannot have any opinion of them. Be careful when you send heroes and agents out away from your central territory, because you will uncover other factions. A faction that hasn't discovered you cannot dislike you or declare war on you. So there's benefits of staying small and insular, but you can use this to your advantage. Here we are, the central nation here, and we have some wood elves here, and whilst they don't hate dwarves, they certainly have some aversion to them, but they haven't actually ventured out this way. They're all the way over here, so we can safely build relations with these guys as well as these guys, and over time, by the time they meet, they will have our friendship in common. So you only need to consider your neighbors and typically the ones after them, but just keep in mind those big superpowers that are building in the background. Now on how we measure relations and what a good or a bad score is. By hovering over the icon of any building of a faction, the bottom left corner will give you a breakout box, and this could be either positive or negative. If it is above 0, then it's going to be in the green, and that's all good. When it's around 0, there's a chance that they could declare war on you, very, very low. More likely, if they're on the fence, they might get roped into it. But once it is below 0 and definitely degrading, you are in some serious risk. This goblin faction here is negative 175, but it is improving slightly. Either way, that's probably not enough to keep us safe, but if we double click on it to bring up the icon, we can see that there's 2 upward arrows there. A single arrow up means that things are improving, and a second arrow up means that they are really improving. But really, just as long as they are not degrading, will significantly lower the chance of them declaring war on you. So critical tip number 3 is that trend matters. The trend of the score matters almost as much as the score itself when it's very close to 0. So just keep that in mind. The magic number is 0, you want to keep it above there, and if it's below there, get it trending up if you don't want to declare war on them. Doesn't have to be much above 0, just keep it above there. Now, before we get into the different types of treaties, I want to make very clear critical tip number 4, which is don't sign everything. Total War Warhammer 3 added the quick deal function in, and whilst it is incredibly useful to see what's available to you, just because you see something in the green does not mean go for it straight away. This is a huge trap that I see a lot of players do, and just because someone was near them, they signed an agreement, but that agreement might actually be with someone who's actually quite weak, who's at war with someone who's very powerful. What's going to happen is that powerful faction will wipe out that smaller faction, and then they have a whole lot of grievances with you for getting in their way and then funding a trade deal or just being nice to someone they hate. So make sure those agreements that you sign are with people that you want to have agreements with. Trade deals are usually relatively unoffensive, but if said trade deal pisses off a powerful neighbor, then you might want to reconsider it. So how do we know how they feel about things? Well, in the diplomacy screen, you can select any faction you want. Easiest thing is to double click to select them, but when you're in this screen, now that you've selected them, you can now hover over any other faction and you will see their opinions of other factions. For example, Kalida here, she likes us, absolutely no chance of war, but what's the deal here? Well, she absolutely hates Khorne. Well, we hate Khorne too, so you know what, I don't mind being friends with her because that's no big deal. Now if we look down here, she's at war with Kroq-Gar. Now that actually is a problem. He's a powerful Lisbon faction and we might be too busy on our other fronts. Now what's our opinion of Kroq-Gar? Now let's select him. This is okay, so this is 8, so he's not going to declare war on us and it's moving upwards. If that was going down, maybe we throw a gift, but guess what? If we get too chummy with the Court of Liberas and keep signing agreements, he is going to start disliking us and we're either going to have to gift him to keep him on side or face the fact that this could turn into war. Lower on the interface here it shows their allies, wars and their trade partners, so keep that in mind when making your assessment. So we need to understand, how do other factions assess the worth of a deal? Well, first and maybe the most obvious is that their opinion of you. The more you improve relations, the easier it becomes to sign different treaties. The other really important thing is called balance of power, and that's indicated by this line in the middle of the screen here. Now what this is your strength versus theirs. Now here it's basically all the way filled up with green in favor of us, meaning that we have overwhelming forces, and if you look at the size of our empire compared to his, there is no surprise there. But let's look at, say, the strength rank 1 in the game. These stronger factions have comparable military power to ours. Now in this case here, our bar is just a little bit below halfway, which means we're almost even. So if it's half green, half red, that is even. Now, just keep in mind, this has nothing to do with territory. This is pure military forces. Despite the fact we have a massive kingdom here, if we disbanded all of our military, this would go to nothing, and this bar would be completely red with everyone regardless. But quite similar, as we go down, we'll notice that as we get to the really weak factions, that balance of power bar is basically completely full and completely green, simply by virtue of how much overwhelming military force we have on the campaign map. Quite naturally, the times you will see this drop the most are when they lose a major battle, particularly if it's your main army, which has most of their powerful units and their legendary leader. If they lose their armies and their military and they have a lot of threats coming in, they are going to be far more willing to sign defensive and military alliances. And that's the other thing to consider, is also the threat level around them, i.e. how many people are at war with them, but most importantly, how many armies are threatening or have damaged their provinces. Now, honestly, the most useful use of balance of power is being able to assess what your enemy has before you declare war on them. If you can see that they're quite weak at this time and you have the availability, this might be the time you choose to strike and hit them before they can really react and wrap up that war nice and quickly. Because this bar tells you exactly their military strength compared to yours, you can actually work out what they have on the campaign map. If the bar is equal, meaning your forces are equal to theirs, that tells you if you only have 1 or 2 armies, they most probably only have 1 or 2 armies. But keep in mind, balance of power is also made up of the quality of the units in there. So one very powerful army could mean that there's 2 weaker armies on the opposing side to balance that out. Having a high balance of power is the other major deterrent from enemies declaring war on you. Nobody wants to start a war that they can't win. Quick tip number 5 is to make sure that you build your strategy around the major factions. All major factions have legendary lords. The non-legendary lords are just regular lords, and these are smaller factions, and to be honest, they're just designed to be destroyed and eaten up by larger factions or confederated. Now, you should still use diplomacy with these guys, but what I'm saying is make sure your long-term strategy is built around the large major factions. So let's get into the different diplomatic options available to you. Anyone you are at war with, you have one option and one option only. First, you must declare peace for anything to go down. Now, peace can be a difficult thing to pursue. There are often just imprinted racial prejudices. Too much suffering may have happened. They would rather go down fighting rather than lay down their arms for you. And that's quite common. For example, the Greenskins, they're quite famed for being very difficult to peace out with. Whereas the Norskins, they'll come down for a raid. Once you destroy their armies, they usually don't want any more to do with you. The easiest way to obtain peace, if it's possible, is to just have that balance of power bar fully tipped into your favor. So that's going to happen from destroying their armies. But over time, you'll find the penalties that drag your score down over time due to war will decrease. A common thing you'll see is the enemy just offering peace when they have maybe 1 settlement left and no army. So fat chance, remember, the less wars you have, the better. Finish them off decisively. But if you have too much going on, you might have had a brand new unexpected conflict and feel overextended, then sometimes, yes, it's better to take that so you can focus on one direction at a time. Now, what do your allies think of this? The reality is not much at all. Don't ever resist a peace that will benefit you just because of what your allies think. As long as you didn't duck out of the war in 10 turns, they don't mind that much. So long as we're not at war, the most basic treaty is the good old-fashioned non-aggression pact. This is just simply a pact of saying that we won't attack each other, and if we do attack each other, our reliability will tank to very, very low. Now, reliability is the other factor on whether they will take deals or not. If you tank your reliability, people don't want to deal or sign agreements with someone who is fickle that will just simply break them. Try to keep your reliability as good as you possibly can. The AI factions will always terminate the non-aggression pact, so if you see them terminate their non-aggression agreement, take the warning, and if you can, you might want to gift them to get things back up to favorable terms. Getting any agreement signed will give you a bonus. As we see here, by signing the non-aggression pact, our relations are now improving even more. We could also sign military access with them, and then once again, this has also improved another 10 per turn. So it's a bit of a compound effect. The more agreements we have with a faction, the more it stacks up. If other basic treaties like trade or military access become available from selecting a certain treaty, you should always opt to take these over money because those relation bonuses will stack and prove much greater. But what if we change our mind? What if we do want to attack these guys? Well, here's the deal. You can break break an agreement without any loss to reliability, but it must stand for 10 turns. You can break any agreement by just clicking the X next to the treaties, and as you can see here, it says it's counted as an act of treachery by destroying the treaty so soon after signing it, so you need 10 turns. Now if we break it, then our reliability will go very low, but listen, this scales. So if you only are able to wait 5 turns, your reliability will still go to low but won't tank to very low. If you manage to wait till say 8 turns, then even better. Once you've terminated your agreements, you need to wait another 10 turns before being hostile. Just make sure you don't want to attack anyone you sign these agreements with, because ending treaties gives you a massive penalty. So let's just do it for example's sake here. There we go, our reliability has gone to low, and lo and behold, look at that, broken treaty, -40. So they've condemned that, and as you can see here, -10 to trustworthiness because we broke a treaty. You can use the balance deal button to get a bit of extra gold for your time. But just be aware, if this person is really badly beat down, balance of power absolutely destroyed, and you can tell they have lots of enemies on their gates, keep in mind that they will need that money. So if they're in strife, don't bleed them out. And honestly, if there's a neighboring faction you want to confederate, even think about giving them a couple of thousand gold to keep on building their military, because there's a myth, I don't know where it came from, that the AI just get free money. It's not true, they need money. So by all means, balance the deal. You can even round it up in your favor a little bit more. Now trade deals, they're usually fairly harmless, and of course they can make you some extra cash, which you can see here by hovering over, and we're going to absolutely sign those where we can. Your trade revenue is a factor of the tradable resources you have at your disposal. You can see at the bottom left hand corner your tradable resources, and you can see theirs as well should they control any. This is simply obtained by getting settlements and building up the tradable resource building in that settlement. Keep in mind, to make money off these, you obviously need to be exporting them. There's no point leveling up the building if you're not exporting 100% of the goods. Here we can see wine and marble are being exported 100%, so it will be worth upgrading that building to produce more and make more money off it. You'll have trouble making new trade partners if you are exporting all of your resources because, well, you've got nothing to trade. You'll notice more potential trade partners become available when you get control of more resources. Military access simply means that your armies can march on their territory without any diplomatic repercussion. Just simply hover the mouse over and you can see who owns that territory. Now, just so you know, heroes, they can walk anywhere they want. They're just agents, but an actual army led by a lord, that will absolutely piss them off. We want a future with them, so we will sign non-aggression as well as military access in order to maintain our relations. If we wanted to, we could march over here and we would take no penalty, but over here with Midland, just for example's sake, if we march Carl up here onto their territory, we can see -10 for trespassers. So trespassing is very easy to avoid. Don't do it. Simply just walk a few more steps the other way. Don't step on people's land, but again, people that hate them will like you better for doing it. Here we can see these greenskins up here don't like Midland, and we're getting a +1 benefit because of that trespass. Medieval factions will need to trespass because raiding comprises a large amount of their income, but of course make sure you raid enemies that you're at war with or just people that you are going to be at war with, because the diplomatic bonuses will add up with their friends. Heroes never get trespass penalties, they are just agents. So as a rule of thumb, next critical tip, make sure you only do hero actions against targets you're at war with or will be at war with. And as you can see here, you will have a negative penalty for doing hero actions, and that's anything against any of their characters, armies, or settlements. So the 3 basic treaties are, of course, non-aggression, trade, and military access. These are generally not too offensive to other people, but using these will develop your relationships to lead to even better ones. One of the most important and critically overlooked elements of the game is gifting. People just immediately cast this away thinking, well, I'm giving away money, but gifting has been a huge part of diplomacy throughout history. Now, when should you use it? Well, as previously mentioned, if there's a neighboring faction that is powerful, a big player, don't worry about small factions that you can easily smite down. If they want to start a war that you can win, let them. But if we're talking another superpower like a major dwarven faction where we maybe need a bit more time, we can see it's below 0, declining, we need just a bit more time, let's give a couple of small gifts, which will give us a short-term buff to the trend, and that will decrease the chance of war to buy us enough time to mobilize our armies, and then we can strike them. The other time where gifts can be really helpful is if there's someone you want to confederate or develop a long-term relationship with that you can't just get that first agreement signed, but just getting off the ground sometimes is where an initial gift can be very, very useful. But what size of gift should we consider? Well, most of the time when you're gifting, it's just to shift the trend. So if this is decreasing, you only need a small gift or a couple of small gifts at worst. Now, don't spend over 1,000 gold on a small gift. You want to keep your eye on this because the size of a gift is relative to their treasury that time. If they spent all their gold on the previous turn, then it is going to be very cheap for you, and you might even want to consider a medium or a generous gift. Now, these are just a slight increase, but they will also last for longer, so it can be beneficial to you when you see a very wealthy faction has bankrupted itself, and a medium or a generous gift will go very far. So this is when to consider these, and it will save you having to top up on smaller gifts. But much of the time, you'll find yourself just trying to get someone over zero so they don't declare war on you, or just getting that relationship off the ground. Once you get that first agreement, the rest of them will start to come, so long as you keep your enemies aligned. But if there's a massive major faction with a legendary lord, then consider a gift. Here we have the Golden Order, led by Balthazar Gelt. Now he is a legendary lord. Let's give him just one gift, and one gift only. This will get the trend going upwards, and hopefully these basic treaties become available to us sooner than later. Now all the other ones around us are not major factions, so I really honestly don't care, but how do I ensure they all stay aligned? Well, if we look at the quick deal function, we can see a bunch of empire factions all around here, so let's just sign as much as we can. Most of them like each other, so they will all gain benefits and bonuses from signing with one another, and through doing this you can align everyone through the same interests. Have a look at these guys. We're pretty close to non-aggression. Let's see, let's balance that, and $31 for a non-aggression. I can absolutely do that. Well, now just by virtue of signing the basic treaties alone, we are now going upwards in trend, and we also have our potential future legendary lord there going up in trend. The other time to use gifts is when you have long-term allies. You've taken all of the wealth up, and they don't have the wealth to be able to produce the armies to do what you're asking of them. And as a result, over time, their relations with you can decrease over time. So every now and then, just double check your allies here. And this relationship couldn't be going better, but he is not doing well. His balance of power bar is obviously very low compared to us because he's lost all of his armies. Next turn, we should absolutely look at giving him an extra 1,000 gold to help him get his armies up and running quicker so he doesn't lose any more territory. So we've been through how we can spend money to get diplomatic agreements done, but how can we make some money? But now welcome to Joining Wars. Joining Wars is one of the most critical things for advanced play in terms of your diplomacy. Now, joining a war means that you won't trigger the target's diplomatic allies. You're not declaring war, you are joining someone else's war. So this means you can attack someone who has a lot of allies without actually attracting those allies. But be aware, those allies will hate you for this, and they will quickly despise you. So you've got a limited time until they declare war on you too, but you didn't trigger it, so therefore if you wipe them out quickly, you won't have any other blowback. But here's the other thing, you can also join a war to someone you haven't even met yet. Here we have Hochland, they're a decent distance away, and they have these Chaos Warriors here, which we'll get to eventually. But what we'll do is if we join this war, we can now get a non-aggression pact and make a bit of money off this. You will gain a massive increase in relations for conducting battles against enemies of your enemies, but even just merely joining the war will be enough, and a great way to boost relations is to find a war that is already effectively won. We have Ungrim neighboring us here, and he is at war with a couple of factions. One of them only has one settlement left. This will give us another increase in relations. Treaties with Karakadrin, +10. Now we're moving to the advanced agreements, which are alliances. There's two types of alliance. Let's go with the defensive alliance first. This means you and your partner agree that if anyone declares war on either of you, you will follow the other into war. You can refuse to do so, but it will destroy your reputation, so definitely sign these very, very carefully. Now, the best times to use a defensive alliance are if you're trying to build yourself up for a long-term partner, trying to confederate someone, or in this case, here we are Haggraith. This is our red territory here. We are now on the frontier. We now have Malekith here. He's in basically the rear of our territory. He doesn't have too many threats left there, but if someone around here declares war on us, we want him to be roped into this conflict. We don't want him sitting back here with nothing to do and no enemies in common. By keeping enemies in common is the most important thing you can do in this game, and that's the next critical tip. Keep your enemies in common, and defensive alliances are a good way of expanding and pulling the people in the rear of your empire into the conflicts on the frontier. Now, military alliances, on the other hand, mean that if you declare war or your partner declares war, you both also have to follow each other into hostilities initiated by yourself. So it's a two-way street, but again, you can use military alliances to keep your allies on side by ensuring your wars are aligned. For example, we have a mountain pass protecting us here, but just say these guys weren't at war with these guys, we could have a military alliance and declare war on them, knowing that these guys are on the frontier and are going to have to be the ones to deal with it. So military alliances, ironically enough, are most useful if you are the one that's not on the frontier, to keep your allies busy and ensure there's lots of wars and lots of pressure on them. Not too many, you don't want them to lose those, but you want them to keep that aggression targeted away from yourself. Now, this takes us to one of the most powerful new abilities in Warhammer 3, and that is the settlement trading function. We have this forest here and the dwarves here. We would like to get ourselves a military alliance with them, but that's not going to quite cut it. But what we can do is trade this settlement to them, and as you can see, positive 121, they really like that idea. This is one of the most effective ways of building up your empire and building up your alliances. Now, when is this useful? Well, it's most useful when the territory is red, when it's a terrible climate. These will usually cost you a lot of money, a lot of resources, and you are often better off selling them to potential allies and allow them to build that territory up quicker and stronger than you can. And this will build relations up quickly, make you a lot of gold, and basically gives you an instant alliance. Another great new mechanic introduced in Warhammer 3 is the allegiance system, and this allows you to do a few things, including hiring units from other factions. Now, you can hire up to 4 units of any of your allies into one army, but this will cost you something called allegiance. Now, allegiance is built up over time. The easiest way to build it is to go to war coordination, and if you go to ally missions, you will be able to see different enemies that you're both at war with, and you basically just hunt down generals and get a reward. So make a bit of a routine in each turn, go through each of your allies and find yourself a mission which you know is relatively close by and easy to get. But also, you can set targets, tell them to attack someone, tell them to defend one of your territories, or even occupy some unoccupied territory. You can even request one of their armies, which will make Confederation easier. In Warhammer 2, allies were typically unreliable, didn't do much, and they hampered Confederations. They are the exact opposite in Warhammer 3. Allies are excellent, just be careful because you can get roped into unwanted conflicts, but you can build outposts. Defensive alliances only allow for level 1 outposts, but this will also increase your allegiance over time, improve your relations, but this also provides extra garrison units. You typically want to build it in a capital that will get up to tier 5 so you can recruit those high tier units, but the other consideration is that you get extra garrison troops. This is an actual outpost, so if it's on a border and you don't want the enemy coming through there, you want to ensure your allies stay strong, this is another great way to boost those numbers. But once you get to a military alliance, you can get your outposts up to tier 3. This means stronger garrison units, but even better recruitment. Now, the final agreement is Confederation, and this is when another faction cedes all of their forces, heroes, and territory to you, and it's typically an act of last resort. This was absolutely busted in Warhammer 2. We're able to confederate a lot in this game, but it is far more difficult, and it requires two main things. Of course, very high relations, but also they need to have threats around them, and this is how you can use military alliances and defensive alliances to ensure that they have lots of heat on them as well as are aligned with you. As the game goes on, the threat level around all of you will start to increase naturally, and what this will do is you'll probably notice not really much happening till maybe turn 50, might even be turn 70, till you get your first Confederation. It'll either be an act of desperation from a very weakened faction, or you will just get the chance because they've lost their army and their balance of power has just diminished. Just keep in mind, when you do confederate, you will incur the Confederation penalty, which is -40 to all relations. No one likes someone who has seized a lot of power quickly, and that resentment will boil over in about 5 turns. When you confederate, you typically want to do this to salvage the Lord if their faction is going to die. Legendary Lords themselves can bring a lot of benefit to your entire empire. Many of these are in the form of global bonuses, but you don't even need to confederate a single faction anymore to have a strong and successful campaign. Don't structure your campaign and strategy around this, just play normally, make sure they have lots of threats on them, they'll eventually lose their army and they'll be keen to be part of your empire. It's typically most difficult to do when the faction you're targeting is half a world away because they don't really feel that close to you, they don't feel that supported. Lastly, you can also threaten, which means that they have to take the deal or you go to war with them, and this will tank your reliability. The only time you should ever consider doing it is if you're trying to confederate. This will take you down to low, but you'll probably recover over 10 to 20 turns. Now this is only likely to ever work if you're between maybe -10, sometimes -20, but feel free to save scum, give it a go, try threaten, and if it doesn't work, your reliability will absolutely tank and you will be at war. But I just want to quickly add here, confederating I really believe is a trap. It's really daunting and very overwhelming for a lot of newer players. I see so many campaigns just get ditched because people's turns take too long. But there is a strong trend that I see that when people confederate a lot, they take on too much territory and they get bored. Honestly, alliances may be the better way to play. If you want to play a lord, just start up a new campaign and play them. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.